even though staff is recommending the denial or the not recommending this change, we crafted an ordinance in case in case the commission decides to go another direction and ultimately the council. As part of that, obviously, we're trying to offer you our best professional opinion, but we're happy to support whatever decision is arrived at and do whatever we can to make that work for sure. I will say in the ordinance, what we've written in the ordinance is that if a change is to occur, what we suggest is that an additional narrow exception be allowed. That would be, again, for structures, single-family dwellings that are built prior to 1980, and that for those that do have adequate parking, that they could have a reduced setback of 8 feet for additional garage space. And the point about additional garage space specifically is to prohibit the reduced setback for additional living space. So we think if the commission decides to recommend an exception or an encroachment into the existing setback standard, that should be definitely limited to garage space. The staff recommendation thus is that the planning commission conduct a review of and discuss regarding the proposed ordinance amendment and consider whether they believe the ordinance amendment should be adopted. Staff recommends that the ordinance not be amended regarding the side setback. This recommendation is based on the perspective that consistency with regards to this core requirement is in this case the primary consideration, and that amending this requirement could lead to unintended consequences in the R110 zone. If the commission believes that the ordinance should be amended, staff is of the opinion that a reduction should apply to garages only and not be permitted for living space. And as I just discussed, even narrower than that for structures, to leave it with structures prior to 1980. So I think that covers my thoughts. I think it's clear that staff's taken a clear position on that, but we're certainly open to questions and want to do whatever we can to facilitate whatever decision you arrive at. Are there questions that you have?
I do have a question.
Sure.
You probably alluded to all this already. Unintended consequences. Could you review over some of those? What you see as unintended consequences? I know you alluded to one.
Well, so there's been an expectation created among the residents of the zone for 20 years that the main dwelling on another property will be 10 feet away from their property. And this would be a carve out to that. And so the best way I know how to explain it is that when you create a zone, there's sort of the intellectual creation of that zone, and then there's the fulfillment of that zone where people start to build homes and et cetera. And there's a time and place for some adjustments to that. But this zone is basically entirely built out. And so if the zone changes and people have said, okay, well, I have a reasonable expectation that my neighbor's property's, like the building's going to be 10 feet away, and the whole zone is built on that basic premise, then it's fair to say that that should stay the same, so that you're not getting a number of exceptions into that after people have already gone into the property and said, this is what works for us, and they've seen it on the several thousand structures in the zone. So does that answer your question?
Mm-hmm, it does.
Can I ask a question about the build out of R110? What is the likelihood that we'll have more R110 zoned areas in North Island City going forward?
I think it's relatively low with the R110 zone because where it's could you pull up the zoning map, Scott? That'd be okay. Because where it's located is primarily built out, and it's sort of the mid area on the bench where starting about maybe 2,800, a little bit above that, and then it goes to maybe 3,300 or 3,400, a little higher up to. But the zones above it that are the HP1 and HP2 that are being developed are very, very similar. And so it's saying, we've had 2,000 structures or more, I'm just guessing at that number, but that have been held to this 10-foot standard. And then creating a carve out that isn't specifically based on a unique and compelling interest, such as the age of the structure where they weren't, two-car garages weren't as common, we think is risky, because it starts to undercut those expectations of the residents of the zone.
Okay, thank you.
What's the logic behind the 1980?
Well, this is a guess, but because I wasn't here when that was written, but my guess is that it was carved out for 1980, that the existing exception was carved out specifically for structures that were less likely to have a two-car garage, and particularly a two-car covered garage. And
So the 1980s currently in the zone?
there's currently one exception, which is for structures that are 1980 or older than 1980, I think is how it's written, and do not meet the minimum requirement. So we're recommending that stay as the sole exception. But if you do recommend an exception, then in that case, the staff's recommendation is that it again be limited to structures older than 1980, which again are less likely to have,
Essentially, it was probably written so that if a house didn't have the adequate setbacks, but they wanted to add a garage, they would give them a little more space to do that. It seems like.
That's our understanding and our belief as well. So, and for the record, the number of times that exception has been used, I don't actually know how many has been used. I don't recall ever approving a building permit. I do know that people have asked, but it might have been one of my coworkers that approved a permit or two that other people asked about, but it's been probably 3 times or less in the time that I've been at the city for 6+ years.
And that has only been for homes 1980 or for.
Yeah. And so functionally speaking, that carve out has not been, it doesn't functionally exist in the zone. There are probably homes in the zone that were built under different standards, and at some point the R10 zone was applied to it. But it seems, as I did try to.
I know somewhere we have it in, like if you convert a carport to a garage, there's an allowance there because I think technically the carport's not the structure of the house, so it might be in the setback. And then if somebody wants to enclose a carport to a garage, I think there's something about the carports in it and doing that, because simply I think the city stance then was more enclosing carports into actual garages increases the aesthetics of the neighborhood, it helps. And so there was that exception for that. I don't know what.
Just don't tell that guy that. Put a carport on the way to Wild One.
Wait a year.
Yeah, wait a year.
I was just gonna suggest that there's probably some likelihood of R110 happening on the southeast side of the city that's currently RE20. Some of that area is built out, but from, land values are so high, what we're seeing in applications at this point are R18s or modified R1 5,000 square foot lot zones. So I think we'll see more of those. You'd be more likely to see requests coming in under like the HP1, which is the R110 zone district, but with the hillside protection overlays as far as geotechnical stuff goes. So when you look at the zoning map, you're really comparing 2 areas. You've got this whole large yellow, which is R110, and then the HP1 zone, which has significant hundreds of units that we expect to be built up in the lands up above Long Bench on the relatively flat areas up there. Will all follow those same standards. And this would, there's an argument to be made that applying this in R110 would likely bleed over and apply into the HP1 zone too, but we don't have an applicant who's in HP1. So
Yeah.
Are there other questions for him?
No, go ahead, keep going with it.
This is where I'm a little
That's
bit out
where
of
you
my
bet-
depth.
this is
Do I
where you
open
bail
to an
out.
applicant now? Is that-
Yeah.
Okay. If there's an applicant that wants to address us, you're welcome to do so.
Hi there, Commission. I am Tyler Crittenden. I'm a North Ogden resident, and this is about me. So
What is your address, sir?
1128 East, 3200 North. So thank you, Brandon, for presenting that. I appreciate the time that you've all taken to do this. So as has been mentioned, we want to build a third car garage. And like I say, put quite a bit of thought and planning into it, drafting and talking to architects and builders and stuff like that. Because I want it to look good and I want it to look right and not look like an afterbirth of the house. The way our house is set on the lot, it's offset a little bit. So there's 25 plus feet on the other side, 20 feet, 2 inches on the garage side. And we want it to look right. I mean, obviously we could put it on the other side, but it just would not look good. And that would be a detraction from the neighborhood, I think. One other thing with it is, ultimately our goal is to, be able to put a boat in there, stuff like that. And we have quite a, so technically there's enough parking spaces, the two required for the 2-car garage, but we have a steep slope hill driveway. So I don't know if any of you have ever tried to unhook a boat on a steep driveway, but it doesn't work too well. So we like to be able to put it up off the road so that we can put it away and store it away. Also, we'll have some teenage drivers potentially coming up in the next few years. And so trying to keep the neighborhood clean and looking good and also so that it doesn't look like my neighbors that's a street above me that parks his fifth wheel on the road all summer long and stuff like that. So ultimately, what we're trying to do, and I realize it doesn't affect as much from where the houses on the adjacent properties or the properties next door are, but that is kind of a reference. So on the east, where we want to put this garage, the next neighboring structure is about 55 feet away from our house. And on the other side, it is probably 40 something. And so, again, I understand some of the complications. I don't know if there's a way that we could maybe, write it creatively, if you want to think of it like that. Structures before 1980 that have a sloped driveway, asking for an additional 2 feet, I don't think is a crazy request, but at the same time, I understand the implications that it could potentially cause future problems and things like that. So just ask for your consideration. Does anybody have any questions or anything?
I might have misunderstood something. You said you had on the side you want to put the garage at 20 feet. Is that what you said?
20 feet to the property line and like 55 feet to the neighboring house.
Okay, so that 20 feet doesn't have any type of parking structure on it yet, like cement or anything?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
The addition you want to put on is 12 feet, correct?
12 feet wide. And the reason for that is, I don't know if you ever try to do a single car garage that's only 10 feet wide. You pretty much need a 9-foot wide door to get in there. And so if you get into the structure and you try to open your doors, you can't like open the doors. So.
Like to see you back a boat up that hill and make the corner and into an 8-foot garage. I think that'd be pretty amazing.
Some good driving skills.
It's doable. I've done it a few times.
So,
It's not fun.
trying to keep it simple. So
Just tell your wife to go in the house while you do it.
it's a good idea. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Discussion, commissioners?
I think the applicant makes a really good argument. I think that staff makes a good argument about how it would affect the other parts of the R110 zone. I can't help but thinking is the only option to satisfy this distance between the applicant is to make a zone,
Ordinance change.
an ordinance change, or is there another option? Because it seems reasonable based on the explanation, and it sounds like the city council thinks it's reasonable as well, but that's kind of a tricky one to address.
Then we explained all the distances between everybody else around the neighborhood. It changes the picture.
Yeah.
It's always difficult when you have a resident, you think, well, this is a really reasonable request from this particular situation. The problem is when we make an ordinance change, it's not just for one resident. It's really gonna have to apply to, you know, a large portion of the city. And I think the explanation and the justification in the staff report of maybe it's not really a great idea because it has to apply to the whole city. And I think it was very well written, very articulate, and a lot of, a lot of good explanation about why this really isn't a good idea to apply to the whole R110 zone. You know, some of the considerations they had is the request a positive change for the city? I would have to say, I don't think it is a good change for the city. You know, we have a certain standard that we've held everybody to. We have a certain, aesthetic. And we have a certain spacing between houses, and I just don't think it's appropriate to make this change for the whole R110 zone.
Yeah,
That's just
I
my
mean,
opinion.
so there's, having developed or built in a lot of cities, you see the different zoning and setbacks and requirements. In my opinion is the whole 1980 thing. Like if the city was pressed on that, I don't think that would hold up. Like somebody comes in and says, well, wait, just because this guy's house is 1980 and mine's 1990, I can't add 2 more feet to my house.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think that would hold up if we were pressed. So we got to look at it as really this is going to affect everything and stuff going forward. However, I will say I've built in a lot of cities where the setbacks are adjusted in the sense of we want 20 feet of setback on the sides of the house, but we'll allow it to go 8 and 12 if you want to, instead of 10 and 10 on each side. For whatever reason, there's a lot of cities that do that. And, or they might just have, hey, we're 18 or 10 on one and 8 on the other that they would allow. So that's something that could be considered to say, hey, if there's an adjustment made, as long as there's 20 feet. I guess the idea is, you might go 8 feet here. Hopefully that neighbor's got his 12 on that side, so there's still 20 between the houses. If, houses that are built after the fact, it's easy to check, what the distances are. But going forward, that's what I would see is could be applied as houses being built, as saying, hey, we're going to adjust with this. If that was something we're going to look at. I'm of the opinion that, the ordinance is what it is, and 10 feet, and to me, an exception might be a little bit more down the lines of what we talked about, that I don't know how many years ago it was with the carports and people wanting to enclose those as garages. And maybe it's different when you say, well, I want to enclose and have a 2-car garage in my house. And you say, well, okay, we'll make an exception for the 2-car garage, but if you just want to have a 3rd-car garage, well, then you still got to abide by the rules. That's kind of a weird line to draw, but at the same time, I'm also one that I added a garage on my house, and I purchased a couple of feet of property. I was fortunate that it wasn't built on yet, so I was able to get that few feet of property so I could still maintain the setback that I need from my garage. So, I mean, it's hard to say because you always look at situations like this, at least I feel like, well, this seems totally reasonable and really no harm, no foul. There's plenty of distance between the houses, but that's not really, that would be what I would say our role would be is if this was a legislative thing to say, well, yeah, and under the administrative, the ordinance is what it is. And we want to make that adjustment again anyway. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of up in the air, but on it, if I had to make a decision, I'd probably say leave it the way it is, just so we don't have future issues. But there's ways to figure out how things can be done too. I don't know.
You had an interesting, you're rewriting some or adding some to that, has 20 feet on one side, you have 20 feet on the other side. Since there's enough on the other side, you have that set off. Have that work in the other.
Well,
cities?
so some cities, the ordinance might say is there's a total of 20 feet of side yard setback required,
Right,
and you can divide that up as 10 and 10 or 8 and 12.
okay,
And they let you slide the house to one side or another.
How would that work though? If I bought a lot and there's nobody next to me, so I say, I'm doing 8, and then forces the next person.
But no, it's still, it could be 16. They don't say because he did 8, you want 12. So that's not part of it. So the houses can be closer.
It's just so the total setbacks added together on either
Yeah.
side equals.
I don't
this.
like, sometimes the logic behind it, you're like, well, so what's the point? But they got their 20
You know, I
feet
think
that
about
they
the
want.
neighbors too, because like I said, most of this is all built out. So I'm thinking, well, what if my next door neighbor wanted to add another, shorten that distance? I wouldn't be very happy about it.
So that's a question. Have you ever talked to your neighbor about it?
We have a good relationship. I haven't brought it up with him. I really don't think he would oppose to be totally honest with him.
Okay.
Chair, can I make one comment? So our current ordinance is just as you had mentioned, so it's the R110 zone requires a total combination of width not less than 24 feet, down to a minimum of 10 on one side. So you could have 10 and 14, 12 and 12, whatever combination, but 10 is the minimum in the R110 zone. Same in the R18 zone, it's a combination of not less than 18 feet with a minimum down to 8. So you can do a 10 and an 8 or a 9 and 9, or, those
That's
are the two
interesting
options.
because I swear the R112s are on this 10 and 10.
No, the R1,
Is
so
it-
the R1,
is it-
no, so the R110 and the R112 and a half zone are both total combination of
same.
width not less than 24 feet, exception where there is an attached garage with the required number of parking spaces. Oh, I'm sorry. When there is an attached garage with the required number of parking spaces, both side yards may be 10 feet. So you
Okay,
can
so that's
restrict
why
it
it's
down to 10 and 10.
But they're the HP1 zone or HP2, I can't remember, it might be both, I'm pretty sure it is a flat 10 feet. It just says 10 feet no matter what.
Yeah.
So,
Well, because I also think now, new construction, you're required to have a 2-car garage. You can't do open parking anymore. So that probably is why it just says, well. So anyway, that's my thoughts.
One of the things, I probably should have disclosed this earlier, but I'm gonna call it a new guy card, if you don't mind. Just, Tyler lives about a block from me. I know Tyler, I know his neighbor. We've discussed this in the past, and I think we kind of encouraged him to come before the planning commission and the council. So I've had a lot of time to sort of think about this, right? And I'm with you guys in the sense that it's easier to leave everything the same, because I think I want to give the 2 feet to Tyler, right? Because it's Tyler. But do I want to, if I could make that decision, it'd be great. But unfortunately, I'm set against a kind of a rock and a hard place now, where I say, well, I can't just make that decision for him. I have to make it for the entire R1 zone. And do I want my neighbors, starting to build closer and closer to the property line? You guys, Chairman, I'm not sure if you want to recuse me from this vote, or if that's full disclosure as to what's transpired. But I'm with you, Eric. I'd probably go either way, but I feel like I'd lean 51% to a 10-foot.
One of the things that I thought about as I read this a couple of days ago was, we're always looking at saying, when we come down to these, let's make a little adjustment because it makes sense and it seems like a good exception, is what's the ripple effect?
Mhm.
We just spent, I don't know how many years going through or addressing and readdressing accessory buildings. And we said, hey, at 10 feet, it can be this high from the property line. And then any higher, it has to go further and further away from the property line. And one of the arguments is always, well, I can put my house 35 feet tall, 10 feet from the property line. So we should allow accessory buildings to be full height. That was my argument. I, of course, didn't win that, but it's the same of saying, well, now if we can go 35 feet tall, 8 feet away from the property line in that zone, well, why don't we go back and readdress the accessory buildings and say, well, now we can move them a little closer to the property line because we just allow houses to go closer.
Oh,
It's a
don't do
great
that,
analogy
Dennis.
because
You
you
know,
have
so
the
that's the
light
ripple
and
effect.
wind and all those elements that we discussed with the accessory buildings that I wasn't even thinking about there.
I mean, to me, and the only reason I bring that up is because what caused the accessory building issue was a big building too close to the property line.
Yeah.
And so the bad, what always ends up happening is we have a good situation where it works great and everything should be fine. But the ripple effect is then when there's somewhere that didn't, and it's like, oh, why did we do that?
Or it's
why-
fine for that one applicant situation, but
If we could go through and say each one is approved on a special basis, and then it's different, but we can't, in changing an ordinance, we can't do that. So that's probably, what kind of keeps me to, just the unknown ripple effect, that just the fact that we got done with the accessory buildings, and, everybody always wants to push them closer and closer to the property line. I feel like if we allow 2 more feet on a house, then why would we allow 2 more feet on an accessory building?
I think there's an essential fairness to things too, is we've held people to this standard, in all these developments, and building and everything. Say, well, but this one guy, he's got this special property, this phone, the hill, but the unintended consequences long term, like Mr. Bell was saying, I think is something really consider.
So, no forward motion. Well, since you're leading this, I'll make a motion that we leave the ordinance as it is.
I'll second that.
Further discussion on that?
My vote is yes.
I got my son's.
Hospital call me
Commissioner
again.
Thomas is yes. All right.
Gotta get rid of those kids.
Yes.
Commissioner Carroll,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
It's not gonna mean anything, but I'm actually gonna say no. It's not gonna mean anything. It's gonna go through.
Commissioner Parker.
Yes.
Oh, yes. So that. That's, yes, or whatever that is. So, okay. We'll move forward to item number 7, zone text amendment 2022-04. Discussion, consideration, and recommendation on legislative amendment to add 2-family dwellings into the residential city center zone. By Brandon Dog.
Can I say one thing just before we start that, just for clarification? One, to the applicant, is that this will be forwarded to council with a recommendation of denial of the ordinance as presented. And the council still has an opportunity to weigh in as legislative decision-making body, so it's a recommendation here. So watch for that and we'll notify you. Typically skip a meeting, so we won't be next Tuesday, potentially on the 24th of May. And since we're in budget season, it's possible it falls onto the first meeting of June. So we'll just watch that agenda. We'll notify you when that moves forward. And then just the second point of clarification from my understanding right now is we no longer ask for public commenter's address, just whether they are a resident of North Ogden or not.
I was just curious because we looked up the house, so we could see a
Okay,
picture of the house he was talking
Yep,
about.
no problem. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
They don't state their name and address.
Their name, just their name and whether they are a resident of North Ogden.
Okay.
So,
Is that so we can't stalk them later?
Probably.
Don't do that.
No, I think that's actually a really good change,
It is a good
because
change.
someone could see, bias towards, oh, they live on the hill, versus, oh, they live down where I grew up in Green Acres, I mean, everyone's a resident, everyone gets a vote.
Right,
I think that's a really good change.
I do too.
Okay. So this is, again, this next agenda item is regarding 2-family dwellings in the residential city center zone. This is also a legislative matter, so there's wide discretion on this topic regarding the recommendation. The background on this is that the planning department and the general planning committee recently discussed the potential for reinstating, and I would emphasize the word reinstating, I think is critical in this situation. The 2-family dwellings as a permitted use in the residential city center zone. Staff has been reviewing the history of 2-family dwellings in this zone. This has been a historically allowed use and has been listed in the purpose statement of the zone. So each zone has a purpose statement that's like, what's the point of this zone? That's before you get to the meat and potatoes or the, you know, the core requirements of the zone. And I'll get to that a little bit more later, but they used to be actually specifically mentioned in the purpose statement of the zone. There was a visioning process that, well, the RCC zone was adopted in 2005 and included 2 dwellings at that time as a permitted use, which were determined to be compatible with this neighborhood. The visioning process occurred to determine what type of environment should be permitted in this neighborhood in response to, this is staff's best understanding, in response to some townhomes that were built that some residents had concerns regarding. The RCC zone was a result of that process and included the original purpose statement that included 2 family dwellings. And then duplexes and twin homes were eliminated as a use in the RCC zone in late 2016. However, shortly thereafter, in mid 2017, a similar use, that of accessory buildings, I'm sorry, that should say accessory dwelling units, were added as a permitted use to the zone with certain requirements. And that was, and then in 2021, this is more just of a general contextual statement about planning and zoning in Utah that affects this zone. In 2021, the state made internal accessory dwelling units mandatory in most single-family zones, which would include the RCC zone. With the addition of internal ADUs being permitted both on a state and local level, reinstating twin-family dwellings may be a very small degree of change to the zone. But also add, in addition to that, the people that it will affect will be that would primarily affect, if there's concerns about twin family homes as opposed to single family homes, are the actual residents of the twin family home, because they know that they're going to have another family in an attached unit next to them when they, at the time that they either build or construct the unit. And so that matter of expectations, again, we don't see as being affecting here, because there's, you know, consent and understanding before they purchase or move into the home. Staff is of the opinion that allowing 2 family dwellings makes sense in the residential city center zone, as it was originally permitted in the zone and specifically mentioned in an earlier version of the purpose statement for the zone. Selections from that statement read that the zone, the purpose of the zone is to provide a residential area that encourages preservation of single-family dwellings in the historical area of North Arden City, but also will accommodate the development of dwelling types from single-family through 2-family dwelling units with their associated necessary public services and activities which fit the character of the existing city center. It is also to provide an orderly transition from less intensive, lower density uses to more intensive, higher density uses. So allowing 2-family dwellings to be, quote, added to the permitted uses for this zone would simply be actually reinstating them as a use that was previously permitted for many years. The residential city center zone is overwhelmingly built out, and staff believes that the impact to this zone will be relatively low. However, staff holds the view that 2-family dwellings are consistent with the residential city center zone, given its history of allowing them as a permitted use. And I would also say that this obviously has an affordable housing component to it and housing choice component. Your lot size can be smaller, and yet the setbacks are, I'll go into this more later, the setbacks for adjoining lots on the outside of the twin family homes, that those will stay the same, but you can have a smaller lot size and have the 2 units attached, which requires less property therefore. So there are a number of requirements that staff would recommend if the commission decides to recommend 2-family dwellings to be re-added to the permitted uses for the zone. And I'll go ahead and read the list of those. There's some technicalities that we try to think through. Don't want to, bore everyone to death, but I think they actually help you think through the issues that can arise, and hopefully we've addressed as many as those are foreseeable. But so we've stated that a maximum of 2 units may have a shared wall to create a 2-family dwelling. Each of the units must reside, and these are written into the ordinance, each of the units must reside on separate lots approved by the city in the appropriate subdivision process. The shared wall of the two connected units must be located on the side property line of the adjoining lots. So in other words, the property line would run through the middle of the home, go down a shared wall, and it would be in the same location as the property line. Walls connecting two units, where each unit is on a separate lot and share a side property line, are exempt from the side setback requirements for a single family dwelling in the zone for that property line, but not for the outside walls. But for the shared wall, they'd be exempt from the side setback because they're obviously touching. So all walls not connecting two units where each unit is on a separate lot and share a side property line must follow the required setback distances for the zone. On lots where two connected units are located, the lots are required to meet the lot width requirement, and the lot width of both lots are combined and not individually. This simplifies it a bit. In other words, the lot width requirement shall be measured and applied as if the two lots are one lot. So you take the two lots where half of the structure is on and measure the full width of those two lots at the front setback. A subdivision or subdivision amendment must be approved for all lots for duplexes to be permitted. So what we're saying is you can't just go and build a two family dwelling on one lot and have, or try and, do it into an existing set of lots. And there's an additional reason for that. Even if they were to meet the lot width requirements, there's an additional reason for that I'll explain, which is that minimum. So we are saying that minimum lot area requirements must be met for each lot containing a unit that's part of a two family dwelling. However, the minimum lot size for those lots with such a unit, work staff is recommending that it should be 5,000 feet. And the two lots in total will then need to be 10,000 square feet combined at minimum. I estimated that number last week, felt pretty good about it, and then realized I hadn't ground truthed it, and Scott suggested that I go ground truth it. But by that, I mean, I went and looked at a number of two family dwellings that are existing, and the smallest ones that I could find were about this size. There were some that were actually a little bit smaller, but we didn't feel comfortable. It was 4,300 was the approximate number, but we didn't feel comfortable with that size because of the requirement for a 2-car garage and the fact that buildings, have gotten a little bit bigger in the last couple of decades. And so it was like, really felt that in order to meet the 2-car requirement for duplex, that they should, behind the front setback, that 5,000 square feet is a really solid number to be a minimum. I would think that most lots that would get approved on this would actually be at least slightly bigger than 5,000 just to fit a home that people will purchase on and yard, et cetera. But so we felt like that was a good floor for the requirement. The applicant may receive an exception to the lot area requirements for the individual lot. So in other words, you can go down to this lower 5,000 square foot requirement for only if you're doing a twin family or 2-family dwelling. And in that case, you have to, coming back to the requirement for a subdivision, you'd have to go to a subdivision to state that on the plat that says, so that it says only 2-family dwellings are allowed on these 2 lots. So you wouldn't have someone subdivide lots into 5,000, get some sort of approval for it, and then say, well, I want to build single family homes, because that's not the purpose of the reduced lot area requirement. And so what we're saying is you can have 5,000 if you adjust the plat to say that these lots are only for 2-family dwellings. And the last few requirements that staff is recommending are that the subdivision must be properly approved by the city to ensure the property lines and units are properly located and that the resulting building lots and dwellings meet the requirement of the zone. And then the shared walls joining the units need to meet the requirements of the building code enforced by the city at the time of building permit application. That's just a fire safety requirement, essentially. When you have 2-family dwellings, building code states that there needs to be a firewall separating them. But we left it more broad so that if there's other issues that the building inspectors identify that they can interpret it and apply it. And then the final one, this is not in the version of the ordinance that Scott should have that, and I think if you show it on the screen, is slightly different than the version that went out with the packet. We realized I did some reformatting of some issues. I added one term that talked about, what was it? In addition to the lot area requirements, I put the lot, it should have been lot depth. I can't remember if I used that term, but we'll adjust it if you prove it to lot depth if it's not on one of the requirements. But the main change was that we recommend that a certificate of occupancy not be issued for either of the units until both units, or in other words, the entire structure has received final approval from the building department. And the reasoning for that is we think it can get really messy if you issue a certificate of occupancy essentially for half of the building, and if there's financial issues on the other side of the building, you know, you've got, you know, a problem for the property owner who's moved in. You've also got a property problem for the zone. And so it just can get kind of hairy. And so we felt like it'd be best. A related issue that's also in that same provision is just that they would apply for a single building permit, which we think would reduce issues so that essentially if it's a single building permit, it's going to be a single general contractor that either going to finish the job or, you know, as a whole or not. So I know that was a lot of technical details. I know they're fascinating. So let me know, you know, what questions you have for me.
You know, this sounds like a twin home.
It is.
Okay, which I assume the reason doing this is because it'd be lower cost to build a twin home than it is to build two single homes.
That's one reason.
And also it's kind of, yeah, shared a wall. I did that when I lived in a townhouse in Denver, which worked out pretty good actually.
Yeah, splits it as far as land affordability goes, it's, you know, mobilization of single mobilized company building a single structure that gets sold to two people, so you share all those costs.
Right.
But then it's also the land area as well. You know, if you have a 10,000 square foot lot and it's subdivided into two halves and you're only buying half of the interest of that lot, half of the interest in that structure. We currently, I mean, cities do this differently, but if you have like a 4 or 5 plex wide townhome project, we don't issue any certificate of occupancy on any of it until all of it is complete. So you don't end up with people living on one end and complaining about construction noise on the other end, even though they were just in that position a few weeks ago. So we would review these the same way we do those townhome projects. And we've had conversations with our building department about the review, and we figured it would just be easier to codify that as opposed to having what I think would be the rare case of 2 applicants, you know, 2 building permits for a shared wall construction on different construction timelines. I think that's probably impractical from just a construction standpoint, but never underestimate the ability of people to be creative for what they want to build.
And also it kind of saves on utilities too, so we have a well or shared with less use energy to that wall.
Yeah.
But you're no fun. Why can't I love construction on each side of my wall?
Yeah.
So I do have some I actually have a lot of thoughts about this one. I'm glad we're only at 7 o'clock because I think this area is a really important part of our city. It's a really important part. And there's several things that have been presented in the past. You know, the presentations you did with the mansion houses and things like that. I'm like, all those things work potentially so well for this area. I mean, in my mind, I would be open to even, you know, if it were the right front elevation, if it were the right thing in this area, like 3 or 4, you know, potentially, because you've got some big lots, you've got some houses that need to be remodeled, you know, you've got some real value there. But I also have some real concerns about a quote unquote duplex with like 2 renters. You know, I think that could go the wrong direction for our city in this area, especially, and without architectural standards, we've got a ton of examples that you look around in this area where that's where it went wrong. You know,
That's why they suspended it.
That's why they suspended it, because it went wrong, and that's why you've got these beautiful old houses that have gone into disrepair in this area, because you've got this like very flat duplex or fourplex in some cases that has no character to it in a neighborhood that previously had character. And so I'm kind of thinking about when both of you brought in the guy from the state and some of that training, like if we're gonna make a change like this in an area where we're kind of giving something, it seems like from a planning perspective, we could be asking for something in return too, like instead of just giving something away. But I'd be curious to know, since you put so much thought into this, your opinions on those things before we have kind of a wide discussion.
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it. When you say that, I can't remember how you phrased it, Commissioner Nancarrow, but you said that's why it went away, or I'm assuming you're referring to the design standards for single family homes.
No, not at all.
Oh, why the two-family?
My
Okay.
understanding of it is, you know, when you drive through certain parts of, there are some duplexes there, and they're pretty rundown boxes that really do not fit in with the special character of the RCC zone. And I think it really, I may have my facts wrong or what led up to this. This was just my impression of the discussions that were going on at the time. Is that's when they said no more duplexes in the RCC zone. And I think over the years, we've had a lot of discussion about, okay, well, what's the alternative? Because, you know, people want their kids to live. And then we went this whole direction of the accessory dwelling unit, where you could take a single family home and have basically a second dwelling in there, but it would still have the character and feel of a single family home. But the most important thing is that the owner had to occupy one of those homes.
Right.
And by doing that, it would maintain the aesthetic and the care of the property, rather than having two renters that didn't care, you know, like the property was kind of run down or one side was bad. I don't know, I might not have my facts right, and I'm not stating it as facts, but my impression at the time was the reason that they said, we can't have any more of these duplexes is
Yeah.
because of some that were built that are really not nice. They're really run down.
I don't remember on that conversation specifically, but I do know that there has been a repeated confidence in owner occupancy to help protect the environment.
Yeah.
So, this would start to cut into the issue of just being a twin home, but, if there was an owner occupancy requirement added of some sort, that's a possibility. But it also starts to undercut, it could undercut the, I don't know how you enforce it when there's two units.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And these are often called attached single-family dwellings. I mean, there's a lot of terms you can use for what a twin home or a duplex means. But they're individually owned, they're individually sold, so they have all the rights of a single-family home, which I believe, and we'd have to double check with state code, but may or may not preempt us from having any design standards, which is one thing. We might not be able to require specific things out of them the same way we do on a condominium plat or a townhome, which are totally different animals from a land use entitlement standpoint. And we don't currently restrict long-term rentals of single-family homes anywhere else in the city. So it is, I agree with you that we could run into a situation where you have two renters and they are not taken care of, but you have every bit as much of an opportunity to run into property owner on the left is meticulous, property owner on the right cares less, and 50% of the structure becomes dilapidated over 30 years because one just isn't replacing their roof and painting shutters and whatever else. So it's you run into that issue regardless. But I would caution, I guess, if this is the direction, we're leaning towards it of permitting these, or the council had asked staff to consider these as part of the general plan process, is we may or may not be able to require those things unless we somehow formulate this, and this would be, city attorney thinking this through of, should these be permitted, but only then with a development agreement. because that development agreement gives us the negotiation power, the contract teeth to say, yeah, we'll let you construct these in the RCC zone, but it will come with us having a conversation about what they might look like or the size of the garage or other, ownership requirements, that sort of thing.
So just to add to that, the question, so what Scott's referring to is this provision of state law that prevents regulation of design on single family homes. The question is whether that would apply only to detached single family. We'd have to research that. And the most likely thing to me that would make them is the fact that they're on separate lots, be considered, but it might, the way it's written may still allow design standards for attached units. In fact, because actually the code specifically says that it doesn't apply to townhomes, is my recollection. You could also classify these as a townhome because townhomes are attached in the same way that a shared was. So we'll have to research it, but assuming that you could allow design regulations on on these two-family dwellings, this isn't a catch-all, but I'll tell you that in my experience, one thing that is very basic, even independent of architectural style, is simply the requirement of a porch of a minimum depth and of posts potentially, and to be a covered porch, with, a roof overhanging, and then posts of a minimum width. Those are really basic, but they're a design feature that says this is a structure that's about people. It's independent of architectural style. And then the minimum width on the posts just says, don't make it look, like, yeah. So that's an architectural word.
I never, until I came out of legal, I never realized what that probably means.
This is an issue that's, I think, been going on for years, since I almost first came on the commission, but the only person who might remember, we went on a field trip and we looked at quite a few of these that were in that RCC zone. And it really swayed us into saying, yeah, we get it. But that's when we started having this huge discussion about the ADU and how that really meets the same housing need of two dwellings there, like basically two families could, but it would still have that like single family home aesthetic, particularly in this it is kind of a special area of the city, this RCC zone. It has a certain character to it.
Big trees.
But when we went on that field trip, it was enlightening. I'm picturing like those two side by side, just brown boxes, like tumbleweeds in the front or whatever. And they really just didn't fit there. Do you remember that field trip?
I do, I remember. We went a lot.
It's been a long time ago.
A lot of pretty shabby vendors, somebody wouldn't even own it.
Right, and it's like they were just rental units and, there was no, like.
There didn't seem to be any middle ground.
This is a great place. Yeah, this is a great place in the city to add density. It really is. If we do it in the right way and we kind of get out in front of this, and I think staff has shown the ability to be creative, to kind of look at some of this stuff. We're really in a great position here. I see why the city council is kind of asking to revisit this a little bit. And I think that, ADU thing was a good first blush, but we're probably going to have to do some real planning here on this one in order to quote unquote encourage the character, because you've got big lots in this area, around the elementary school, around the junior high. You've got some houses that are like tiny little houses, which have massive gardens in the back, and some of them are rentals. And there's a lot of things that could be done with that land. And if we gave the right architectural standards of whatever we could enforce, we could end up with some really neat things that would be cost effective for a developer to come in and do. And you see this happening like in Salt Lake and, different places where it's like, this is fantastic. It's not like we're looking at something that isn't happening in other places. I just don't know how to get creative.
Isn't that something we could control through the development agreement?
I guess that's my question too, is even in our own city, we have these duplexes or, whatever we want to call them. We'll just call them that for now, but we have them that have obviously failed and we have some that have succeeded and look good. So what did we do right in one place and wrong in the other? And
I think a lot it has to do who owns them. So you can't control who owns them. If you get the wrong owner in there, it doesn't matter how good the duplex is, it's going to fall apart.
Thinking about that, though, that applies to anybody.
Yeah,
Anyhow,
that's
I
right,
could buy a lot and build an ugly house on it.
right, correct.
It doesn't-
But if I'm thinking about, and I'm speaking in general terms, because I don't want to pick apart anybody's particular dwelling, but if I could say, put design standards on there, right? Then it tends to be owned by somebody who would care for it more if the design standards were higher,
Yep, totally.
right?
It's true.
They're
Sorry,
not just building it, like somebody in California's not just building two
Right,
boxes to
it's-
rent out, yeah.
Throwing it out
quick,
there.
point of order that I just remembered. I think John has a comment, but also, this was. No one here. I really bring the crowds out, so. But if there's anyone
Should we open
online
the-
to make a comment.
should we
then
open the
should
public
probably
hearing?
hold that.
Oh.
Well, so the only comment I wanted to add is everything goes through a life cycle. When Scott got here, we did a drive around. I said, okay, I'm gonna take you to the ugliest duplexes in the city. And they've been fixed up.
Wow.
So, and not just because landlords, eventually they get to a point where either they're sold and the new landlord reinvests, or the existing landlord says, hey, if I spend $200 a month on each unit, I can get $400 a month more.
Yeah.
And so there's an economic decision. And I think what Scott said is true. It's more about who owns it and maybe how long they've owned it, because we have landlords who every time the tenants leave, they rehab the whole building because that's their approach. And others who don't rehab anything, even though the tenant says my toilet doesn't work.
Yeah.
And there's a very few of those. And
That's a really good point.
It is.
so
And,
that's
and I
hard.
think at the time we looked at this, housing values were in a much different
Not
price
much
point than
lower.
they are now,
Yeah.
for sure. Do we need to open a public hearing?
Is that like an official thing, or do we just?
We do, and now I'm remembering, I don't think that we did that for the two-family dwelling, which means it was noticed as a public hearing, we accepted public comments, but I don't think we made a motion to open the public hearing and close it.
No. So we could still do that since we've done it and we got comment. I don't think you're gonna run afoul.
Yeah, I would open a public hearing and ask for anybody.
So we need a motion on that.
I don't think we need a motion. You could just open
Yeah,
a
just open
public
it.
hearing. We just need a motion to close it, I think.
Oh,
Correct.
Okay. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing on zone text amendment 2022-04.
Do you have anybody on Zoom?
There is one attendee, they are not raising their hand.
Make a motion to close the public hearing?
We'll second
Vote thing.
Just all in favor.
All in favor?
it. Aye.
Okay.
Would, just as a point of order, would you like us to open a public hearing also on the previous item?
I think we want to finish this item and then go back and make sure that we did the public hearing.
All right.
And I think it's also good to identify that, the one public did get a chance to comment and talk about it, just wasn't officially during the hearing, but it's a nuance.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, so I guess it's now just discussion amongst us.
I really feel like anything we can do to research how we could have some sort of standards would encourage positive things here. And I don't know how we would do that,
So
and
you're
I
asking maybe-
certainly don't want to put undue pressure on staff, but it feels like staff would love to encourage positive things here. I mean, I was a big fan, another example that doesn't relate to this. I was a big fan of, all the stuff that Brandon wrote up about the street stuff being closer, and there was just tremendous research there, tremendous creativity. I was in the minority in our city of liking that, but I just think that whatever we can do, quote unquote, legally and appropriately to do what's happening in other places would be helpful here. It doesn't have to be much to kind of encourage just a little extra in this area. because there's big lots. There are homes that need to be, remodeled. Someone might choose to scrape the house and do a duplex. But if it was more, or if they even had the ability to do 3 units on this big lot, they might do that. And they might do it with these mansion house standards that some of the stuff that you've shown us, and it could be great. And I think people in the area might like stuff like that, but I just don't know how we approach that, how we gently encourage that. And I think we're in a situation where property values are as such growing that it's a real opportunity for us to kind of get something in return here before we get some ugly duplexes and this area deteriorates.
So I get the feeling you want more information on that before we vote on it.
I don't know. I think I'm just kind of throwing that out there for discussion. Everyone else may disagree with me.
I'm not disagreeing, just from listening to you talk about, it's like, we're having a discussion, do we need more information on how we can control what it looks like?
Maybe. Yeah.
What we expect there from developers?
I know
before
we had
go through
a
further?
lengthy discussion about this, I'm gonna say 2-3 months ago,
Mhm.
where we actually had some pretty valuable comments from some members of some residents who actually lived in this RCC area, who were really not in favor of these twin homes. And they were really more in favor of the ADU concept of meeting the
We
same.
did.
But I just wanted to bring that up, that we did have some pretty good feedback from those residents during that meeting.
Mhm.
Do you remember? I don't know
Yeah.
if you guys were,
I remember that.
you were here yet.
That was a lot over here.
Yeah, and there was,
Yeah.
there was.
It was, I'm trying to remember the family.
considering townhomes. Is that right?
Yeah.
No, this was, I think it was this very discussion where we were talking about twin homes or duplexes within the RCC.
It was a guy and a lady who wanted to build
Versus
something. They lived in
ADUs.
South Ogden. I remember when they gave their address, and there were
Yeah.
some people who lived right by the skate park, kind
Yeah.
of across the street from
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
And then another neighbor came in, an older gentleman, and he was really
Yes.
opposed
Yeah,
to it,
right.
There's a duplex.
That's
And
a
all of them
discussion.
lived within this RCC zone,
Other than the
and some
people
of
who
them
own the
had
property.
memories of,
Yeah.
where it had gone awry in the past.
Yeah.
But there's a lot they wanted to develop and put a duplex on it.
Yeah, maybe it was in conjunction with that.
It's the Lippert
Yeah.
families who
Right.
came and
For the,
commented.
Mhm.
I don't remember though, a lot of that
Building.
conversation had to
And
do
then
with
this
the
is all
tenplex
the
that got
RCC
built
zone.
over there. and
That was part of it.
Possibly,
duplex,
somebody had that on
yeah.
their.
I think that's what encouraged the creation of the RCC zone.
Hmm.
But the issue that was specific to that night was,
There was like a row of townhouses or something.
Mhm. yeah,
across from the
they
park.
had.
It's
some
pretty high
design.
density they wanted to put there. For my part, I don't have a lot of issue as long as there's a development agreement to keep it controlled.
So what's the difference on the 2-family dwelling unit and an accessory dwelling unit?
That's what I
That's
think.
a good question.
Yeah,
I
they're,
mean, what's
Because
the
that's
difference?
already allowed, right?
yeah, they're able to be owned, they're able to be subdivided in separate ownership. So an accessory
Oh,
dwelling
okay.
unit is an add-on to the
The
home.
same owner on
Yeah.
that tax ID.
If it's connected, it can be 50% of the size of the house. So you could build,
Okay.
it could look just like a duplex. You could build like a 4-car garage, 2 single 2-car garages, 2 identical mirrored homes. You could build that right now as an ADU, but most people
I don't
choose to
think so.
build, you don't think so?
No, I think in the design standards, unless something changed, didn't we have it like the entrance couldn't be, like it had to be like the entrance had to be
Oh, yeah,
a
you might have to
different
have a side
way?
entrance.
Yeah,
And this
so,
is a-
so it looked like a single
And
family
this is
home
a
in the front.
question
Yeah.
among the planners right now about, we're waiting to see which city gets pushed on this first. 'Cause some cities are very aggressive
Yeah.
with their design standards
Right.
and saying, I'm willing to push the issue and see where it goes. And other cities have kind of stepped back and said, we can't control design standards in single family homes.
Yeah.
We're somewhere in the middle. So you're right that you could build a 50/50 duplex right now as an ADU if you wanted, as far as square footage goes.
Mhm.
Where the front door is, you're
Right.
absolutely right. We would
Right.
talk about
It
that.
can't
but,
be like, it can't look like 2 houses side by
But
side.
this one, the
Right.
main difference is it can be owned by 2 different people.
But yeah, you can separate the lot, you can separate the ownerships and, Lakeview Heights has a number of these.
They do.
Right.
2 dozen or something. They have a whole section of the subdivision that was designed this way. On the west side of Washington Boulevard, as you go up east up the hill, Roylands Farms has a number of these. That's off of 1900 and west of Washington that are really, high quality, have been kept well. There's some older ones in the RCC, some older ones off of between 17 and 1800 east of Washington. So you have this random smattering of different types of these 2-family dwellings. Some of them are condominium flat style, like we had discussed a few months ago, where the ownership is just the box of the house and maybe like a little top lot area in front and back, like 10 feet, like a condo.
But all we're
that's the
talking
core
about
difference.
tonight is the RCC zone.
Correct.
We're not talking about anywhere else in the city, which I have absolutely no objection to. So.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things that I noticed, I went and looked at the ones on the west side of Washington and Lakeview Heights. And I'd never seen this before, but there were several that were on corner lots. And so from one street face, you saw what looked like a single family home. And then from the other street face, you saw what looked like another single family home. They were attached at the corner.
Yeah.
And it was a really, really interesting way of doing it. It looked great overall. I mean, the buildings are, I mean, they were probably built in the 90s or 80s and they looked really good for the age of the structure. So
Looking down the road, I mean, we're going to have more and more pressure from the state to create density. And this really is a perfect area to create density. That being said, I don't think we want density forced on us in this particular area of our city. I think we want to have whatever we can do legally, kind of forward thinking to like be out in front of this a little bit, because encouraging a couple of these houses to get scraped, a couple of these houses to be remodeled with a wall in it, isn't necessarily a bad thing. It could be a great thing. But how we get in front of that, fortunately our, city attorney here has great resources. Our staff have great resources, and they've proven that they can bring creative things forward. But this is not going to be an easy one. It's gonna have to have some nuance in how we have that legally. I don't know, but it just feels important.
yeah, well, I'm just thinking through the state law about design requirements. And if I understand it correctly, you can have your base zoning, but you can still have design standards if you move to a development agreement zone. So, how that.
And the hard thing about that approach is that if there's a development agreement, it says it just has to be between the city and the developer, but I really think that means it has to be between the council. So every single person who wanted to do this would have a separate development
So
agreement,
Yeah,
and it could be problematic.
very.
Yeah.
And the state code, I pulled up the standards, says that the architectural standards can't be imposed on single family or even duplexes.
Oh,
And so then you have this extra burden of proving why what the standards you're imposing is not just a way to subvert what the state was trying to do. It's a Gordian knot that we're in when we're talking about density and good density and effective density.
The ADU thing is safe. I really don't think it's going to be enough in this particular area for 20 years, but it might be enough for 10. I don't know, because it is, Commissioner Nakara, to your point, we've gotten good feedback about this area and it really is safe and it works for now. Is it the
And
long-term
it meets the
solution?
housing needs that a
Yeah.
duplex would do.
Yeah, it doesn't
And
mean,
it keeps an owner
yeah.
occupying one of the two dwellings.
If in the meantime, we could come up with some more creative solutions
Yeah.
that don't create some of those problems, because I think the city council, that's a problem. That's a big problem. It'll be so inconsistent through terms and people and votes, and it's just a nightmare.
Well, and the other thing I just thought of is if you have twin homes, does that mean every twin home is entitled to an ADU? So in theory, you'd end up with 4 homes?
in the ordinance, I specifically stated that.
They wouldn't, okay. Yes.
Yeah, I think we can control that attached unit. So townhomes are not permitted to have, or not required by state code right now to have cities permit them in internal access or dwelling.
So
A townhome,
Are there any
would that be
markers
considered
up
an
there?
attached though?
I don't, we'd have to look and
Because like
see
the
if
ones at
it's-
Lakeview, they look like houses pretty much, they share a wall. And so they have basements where they could say, oh yeah, we're gonna have a basement be a rental unit.
yeah,
Is there, you know,
And there's probably homes that have them right now up
for
there.
sure. Yeah, there's some good
Definitely
size
there
ones
are.
in Lakeview.
Yeah.
a mother-in-law,
Yeah.
and nobody knows about.
My mother-in-law that doesn't speak the same language as me and pays rent,
Yeah,
lives in my basement.
yeah. Again, another thing we kind of want to get in front of. a little
Yeah,
bit,
well,
Where
and
we can.
and the hard thing is with this specifically, the RCC zone is, RCC is it me or is it every time there's a boundary pushed, it's in this zone?
Mhm,
Like,
right.
Well, you have a lot of landlords.
because it's, well, it's a transition zone that's gonna be that way forever, because ultimately half this zone when the city's built out will be bulldozed over and something else will be built there.
Yeah,
And they have a lot of those, very nice, large properties there, they've been there a
Yeah.
long time.
I'm actually
There's
gonna
a
represent
special
Mace
character.
since he's not here too, and support your special character thing. Every time Mace says, this is the avenues of
Mhm.
North
Mhm.
Ogden, people laugh him out of the door. I actually agree with
He's
him on
right.
that.
It has a special, there's
It
there's
has a
something
ton of
special about
potential.
that RCC.
You wait till he's
zone.
not here to agree with him.
Probably do that my whole life. But seriously, I think you have big trees there. It's interesting. There's a whole subset of the population who want to live in a place like
Yeah.
this. Not everybody wants to view as an important to everyone.
So, this is a brainstorming thing. Since the issue of owner occupancy has come up a number of times.
Brandon, will you speak into the
Yeah.
mic, just so that it's picked up on?
So since the issue of owner occupancy has come up a number of times, both in this meeting and others, I've thought about different alternatives for that. And there's significant buy-in among city leaders and elected and appointed that's, an important factor to helping guarantee the quality of a neighborhood. Well, so I've thought about what are things you can do to leverage that factor. And so if you look at these different layouts, you could even allow multiple buildings on a single lot, as long as one of them is owner occupied. If that makes sense. So right here, you'd have a single family home, but on the same lot, and this could be an income opportunity for the single family homeowner. You have certain open space requirements, but then you could allow potentially a set of townhomes, or maybe you allow a duplex here. They're all in the same structure. This person that lives here is required to live on the property, and they would own the property in whole, but then it becomes an investment opportunity. What that would do is align the interests of the single family homeowner that owns both structures on the lot with the residents of the zone, because any consequences that the residents of the zone face, so do they, because they have to live there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it could be a potential investment opportunity, but also in a way that has an impact that they have an interest in keeping the property high, right? So and then this would be a similar idea where, you own one, or the owner occupied of the property owns one, and then they rent out a separate structure. Maybe this is a single family home, or potentially this is a duplex. And then I guess this is the same thing as that. It's just, the idea here was, even if you have a separate lot here and these connected in the back, you could have just a totally separate property here, and it just looks like a set of townhomes. But everyone knows that this property owner lives right around the corner and is on the same property.
And would
So-
these be considered ADUs that have more than one person in them, more than one ADU unit?
Well, essentially, I mean, they would be a lot like an ADU unit, but they'd be a detached ADU. And the difference between an attached ADU and these, just from a design perspective, is that these are intended to look like a single family home in this case, or face the street in this case, or this case. So in other words, the average person walking by doesn't know that these are part of one property. They see a set of buildings that's facing the street here.
Yeah.
And here, and it looks like, there's a set of townhomes or a duplex, whatever, they all look like, separate properties, but there's an ownership investment on the part of this person, because the requirement to develop those townhomes is that you've got to own all the property. And then you've got to occupy it as well.
Well, here's the problem is that I own this house right now and I build these sixplex or whatever you have drawn up there.
Right.
And then I say, well, I'm moving to California. I can't require the next person then to buy this whole operation.
Sure you can.
Yeah, you can.
So, well, I mean.
Well, you can sell it, but the problem is, say the guy in California that sold you your house that you're moving to buys this and says, well, I'm not moving there, but I'm buying it, and rents it out. How we
Yeah, I
know
mean,
that
it's-
the owner isn't really occupying it
Yeah.
at the next stage?
So anyway, I'm putting it out there because there's a lot of interest in the idea of owner occupancy as a means of preserving quality in our neighborhoods. But
Yeah.
this is a way that aligns interests of making owner occupancy a requirement, but also allowing a pathway for density that gives you the incentive to, with the owner occupancy, to maintain the quality. Does that make sense?
You know, I guess I'm confused because here we're talking about 2-family dwelling, and I'm picturing like some sort of a duplex. You get like townhouse row here. Is
Well,
this-
I'm just
I mean,
saying,
are we,
I'm saying these is different. No, this is, so you can take this away. It's the main
Okay.
concept of, if you ignore this one and this one, you could still have, this would be like basically an ADU, but they would be side by side instead of an ADU
Right.
typically being attached, is typically behind. That, and, yeah. So
Okay.
if a lot was big enough today, you could actually do this I believe in our zoning standards for this one in
you
particular.
could just call it an ADU?
Yeah, you just call it an
Detached,
ADU.
yeah.
But I think they're allowed on the side. I'd have to double check that, but I could be wrong. So anyway,
So to the point of how you enforce that, right? Like ADUs seem to be a hot button for the state. I mean, what prevents right now the exact situation that Eric just said, like, with a current ADU, how does the city enforce that doesn't happen with a traditional ADU?
That an ADU ends up in the basement of a townhome?
No, it's an
No.
owner occupied requirement
Oh,
on the property.
How do you enforce that?
we're responsive to code enforcement, not proactive to code enforcement typically. So it requires watchful eyes of neighbors, where I would say that particular instance is less likely than where we've run into issues is when somebody's long-term renting their basement or the upstairs and then short-term renting the opposite.
Yeah.
So you end up with like a dual use of a property, because those short-term rentals are people coming and going a lot, and that's flagged by neighbors, as opposed to how many of us really pay attention to what's happening 4, 5, 6, 7 doors down the road. And if that house is sold and you don't, they're not somebody you interact with a lot, you're really not paying attention to the numbers of cars that come and go and things. And so they end up silently permitted. And
Sure.
I'm sure we have rentals that also have ADUs that are operating as rentals, and it's like some mix of folks in the house. And we respond to them on a case-by-case basis when they become nuisances.
So when you respond to them, when someone comes in and complains, reactive, and it is the situation that, Commissioner Thomas just stated, how if someone lives in California, they're renting out both things, there's no owner occupied.
Yeah.
How do you enforce that?
We cite them. So
And what's the penalty?
There's fines, and eventually we have the chance to take them to court.
Oh, wow.
And ask a judge to basically
Make
issue
them sell
them
it.
a cease and desist.
Yeah. Oh, that's real teeth. So the situation that Commissioner Thomas was saying, we could do the same thing.
It's just, I think in my opinion, the owner occupied requirement of any of the ordinances is good at the development level. Somebody wants to build a duplex, they want to build an ADU, they want to do that. Oh, you got to be on, oh yeah, I live here, and so I'm going to add this to my property. That's all well and good. It's down the road when they sell their property and some investor comes and buys both of them and rents both of them. Nobody knows the wiser until there's a complaint.
Yeah.
And so the question then leads to, if we eventually do get to court and say, well, I've been renting that property for 20 years and there's 30 other people in the city doing the same thing. There's no owner occupied. Why are you picking me out? Why are you singling me out? Then we don't win,
But if
right?
there's an
Yeah.
ordinance, that requires it, then you do have teeth.
Well, but it's kind of the non-compliant,
Well, but if we had a
accepted because
precedent of
20 years later,
enforcing
we've never
everyone.
had,
Yeah, I personally don't care if the neighbors don't care.
yeah.
But if the neighbors care and they come and say, this is an issue, and because this is becoming more of a hot, this is the way the state's gonna get density.
And I
And I
think
don't think it's a
really,
bad idea.
I mean, on the owner occupied, like I said, in the development stage, that gives us a little bit more say and control as these pop up and get developed and built. And truly, the person who lives there and owns that has more care and interest. And so it's, in theory, going to be done nicer than some guy who's never seen the property and just
Yep.
pays the neighbor to put another tent in the backyard so he can rent it. But so from that standpoint, I think it keeps it nice. And so it's effective that way. But long-term, again, it's governed by complaint and how many.
Pretty hard to control.
Yeah, and maybe that doesn't matter because it's like, well, obviously we don't get complaints. And so to the point that if it is an issue, it's just, in my opinion, when it's 20 years down the road and there's 100 houses in the city that are owner occupied renting out the ADUs as well. We just as well don't change the ordinance and say, well, okay, it's allowed.
I still think having the owner occupied piece makes it safer. It's a little less risky because there is that enforcement, but it sounds like you disagree with.
No, because I say it is good because when the initial first
Okay,
happens,
yeah.
you have the property owner and the person that cares the most about his property doing it. It's when they move out and then it becomes 2 full rentals, then there's really no control. But in theory, it was done proper to begin with. And so you should have less issues down the road.
Yeah.
By adding or talking about this owner occupied side, though, we're no longer talking about duplexes.
Yeah. And I think that's all the ADU stuff we're talking about, right? That's not this ordinance, because this ordinance is 2 dwellings on one property at separate ownership.
Yeah,
The issue is,
On 2 properties.
yeah, it's on 2 properties.
2 dwellings on 2 properties that are attached.
They're
to
just
the shared
attached.
wall.
It's just attached to the
yeah,
family home.
it's condoing out a duplex.
And I
On
don't
property
mind
pretty much
even the
now,
other
right?
2. I don't mind those.
Property line.
I like
Yeah,
that.
so you have 2
That would
separate
be owner
units, 2
occupied more than I like
Yeah.
They're just
2
attached.
units on one property.
Yeah, but then the subdivision has it, there's the not
Because of the
setbacks
owner
and stuff to develop it.
I
that
just
way.
think it would be almost impossible. I mean, people aren't gonna own that house for 30 years, so if they don't own the house anymore, they wanna sell their house.
Yeah.
But the buyer may not wanna buy a whole rental operation,
But if you haven't shared a wall like that, one property is not doing well, taking it out. The other's not gonna be real happy. There's gonna be a lot of complaining between them. Of course, I don't like where you're keeping your yard, it makes mine not look good too.
So this is what's being contemplated today is 2 individually owned parcels separated down the middle, so they each have their own front yard, side yard, rear yard. This is the shared wall. And when you read through Brandon's staff report, this side yard meets the minimum of the RCC, which is 8 feet.
Yeah.
So this would have to be at least 8 feet. The front yard would have to be at least 30 feet. The rear yard would have to be at least 20 feet. This is an ignored setback. So, and then the entirety of this whole area.
But if I want to put a garage on the side, would you let me go to 6 feet?
If you had get in a time machine and built this in 1980.
Okay.
And the area would have to be at minimum 5,000 square feet. So really the only difference between this scenario and their neighbor, which is a single family large home sitting in the RCC, is that this one could be on 8,000 square feet. And this combined would have to be 10,000 square feet. So otherwise, this, and this are all identical. Side, front, rear. The only real substantive difference is that we're requiring 2,000 additional square feet that get separated, so you have 5,000 at minimum, which our smallest current configuration of this is about 44, 4370, something like that. We dug around and found them. But for the most part, they're all 5,000 and up. So Roylands Farms has half a dozen of these, so 12 or 15 units total. They're all 5,000 to 5,400 square feet at minimum for their total land area. And then each of them are 2-car garage and single owned. So.
Well, the big difference then is that this one, the single family home is owner occupied with an ADU. That would be the
You
difference.
could construct an ADU in that or have a basement apartment. Over here, it's 2 individual owned houses, with the question being, would we permit an ADU?
Would be enough space.
So can you deny it?
Yeah, can you deny it?
Yeah,
Probably more
That's the better
more
question.
important question. Can you?
Yeah.
I'm having a hard time seeing the benefit for the city of the top part versus the bottom part. I can see the benefit for a developer on the top part, but I'm having a hard time seeing the benefit for the city on the bottom part. And again, that's why I'm more open to the 3 or the 4, type thing, because of the owner occupied element, both at development. And I disagree a little bit with Eric in that if we could enforce it like that, it feels stronger than trying to enforce anything with the top one. To me, that feels like more of a slippery slope in this area than the bottom one does. And limiting the bottom, maybe everyone says, no, we only want, 2 on the other owner occupied thing.
The bottom with the owner occupied is already allowed, right? When you consider it as an ADU.
Except that you can
One
have multiple
single
units. Yeah.
The
per each unit.
separate detached ADUs are only permitted on 20,000 square foot and larger lots.
Oh, okay.
Internal ADUs have now been required, all single family zones across the state by the legislature.
But I think it's more of looking at it saying that's a way that you allow some density to increase, but yet still keep the structures distanced apart, with the setback, saying
So look at.
you're 8 feet to your property line from the actual structure, because it's still one building rather than 2.
Yeah.
So if you're saying, well, now we're allowing 2 people to live on 10,000 square feet, where in that same zone, only 1 person can live on 8. So it's allowing some density increase, but yet the buildings themselves are still saying the same distance away. So it gets that feel of
Less density.
space,
Good point.
I think that's
Increase the
ultimately kind of what it
density.
accomplished. I thought I read that in your
Mhm.
staff report or somewhere saying
Yeah, I
the
overlooked
ability to
that.
help with a little bit of density to soften that. Instead of jumping straight from single family on 8,000 to townhomes or apartments or whatever, this would be kind of something that's
Still
allowing a
maybe
little bit more
closer to the
density.
character of the
but
RCC.
Yeah.
Less visitor cars.
I mean,
parking on the road.
if you asked me, I couldn't answer in 150 words or less what the character of the RCC zone is. So
The avenues.
it's
Ha,
all my answer would be is transition. That's the
Yeah.
character.
And it's
From
transition.
1925 to 2055.
Well,
I have no idea.
It's changing pretty quick. It's not going real slow.
Well, yeah, some areas.
Mhm.
But again, I think,
But the one, that those two to join, it's kind, me, it's kind of nice to allow the increased density that looks not as dense. And it gives some yards for people to have.
but in doing this, taking one other step, is the only way to accomplish this, like what that drawing is by a new lot. Like, I mean, I guess somebody could add on to their house, but
Tear down one of those old houses.
yeah, is
That's
that,
on a large property or something.
and then is that, I guess in one sense, are we kind of like taking one way extreme slow step in transition?
Well, so sometimes it's helpful to look at case studies, right? To like see how things are changing. So I have a friend who has a house for sale in this area. It was his grandma's house. He remodeled it. It's actually Alan Christensen's son. It's the house that Alan grew up in. And they got a pool and they got a barn back, but they had horses. It's a big lot, kind of goes behind. Somebody in our ward actually had a family member, 2 attorneys from Denver who are moving here. They came and looked at building a house in the Cove. The developer wanted $1 million buffer for the house they wanted to build. And they're like,
We can't do that, you know? Plus, we don't even want this house anyway. We'd rather have this property. We know we're gonna buy, we're gonna remodel it. We like mid-century modern. And so, you know, we're coming into this area and we're gonna buy a house for probably 800 grand. We'll probably put another 500,000 into it because it's got the property we like, it's got the trees that we like. We actually like a pool. And, you know, and there are people moving. There's a lot of people in Salt Lake that I know who ask me questions about the valley or North Ogden, who are looking to move and get a little bit more space. And these are the types of lots they're looking for, but they don't necessarily want to build a new house. And I think we're going to attract those folks by things like this potentially, whatever they end up being, or we'll repel them away from our area because they'll be like, that's a crappy duplex that
Because I don't
has
want to
got
live next to a
dandelions on
duplex.
their yard. I'm not going to spend $1 million on
Well, and
that.
that's why I say I couldn't define what the RCC is, because it goes from what you just explained to the crack houses across the street over here.
Totally.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I don't know that that's what they are. Sorry, I shouldn't say
But
that.
they very well could.
But some rundown apartments that we've had trouble with.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, now that's you, what can we transition those into?
Yeah.
And really then you look and say, well, if it's really the city center zone of the residential, to me, that almost zone may shrink over time to be more like, hey, this is downtown and higher density stuff. And like where you're at, I mean, are you in the zone?
I
I didn't
haven't
know the
been,
zone
I
went
haven't
that
been,
far.
when I looked at the map, I thought I might. in
So
the
I
future,
thought, you know,
but
look
I
and say,
haven't
well,
been.
yeah, that may be like a different zone. And in my mind, in the future, like you might have that where you're at, stay kind of that way. And then as you get 2 more blocks closer to downtown, it may be more dense, and
Yeah,
it's 2 different feels of what the RCC zone
probably really
is.
depends on what the Barkers do with their land, honestly, and how that transitions into legacy.
Me too.
So anyway, I guess
It's not my
the thing at hand, right, is that,
Because I'll have Monroe going through it.
So I think we kind of got an answer to, can we require design standards? I think the answer was kind of not really for duplexes. And so with that in mind,
Kind of.
I don't know if that was kind of your point to begin with, like, you know, if we could capitalize on like a design standard or something, but it sounds like maybe we can't really enforce that with
Probably
a
not.
duplex.
Yeah, which takes me right back to the points you were making with the accessory dwelling owner occupied element.
It meets the same housing shortage need, but I think.
well, do you address it that way then? And say, you know, hey, we'd allow a detached accessory dwelling unit in less square footage in the RCC zone? Reduce that footage from
Possibly.
20,000?
Probably.
And then you have the
Possibly.
owner
That's actually
occupied
not a bad
element,
idea.
and then just say, well, okay, if you have whatever we decide that would be, in 10,000 feet, you could do a detached. Or,
Yeah,
because if it's a detached, you'd need a bigger than 5, because that one, obviously, they touch each other, but.
We'd also have to look at currently the ADU, if I remember it right, in that zone. It has to still look like a single family home from the front. Like it can't have two front doors in the front. It has to be like around the side or something. So if you had the detached, we'd have to address.
Well, that's-
the side by
that's still
side,
currently in
behind,
there
because I think they have to be behind.
As
now.
an attached one, if we do a
Detached
detached,
is what
then,
I'm talking.
yeah, if you said that, I don't know what the.
Is the
rule is.
detached
So you're
required
doing-
in the back, or
Sorry, what was that?
currently is the detached ADU required only in the back? They can't be on the side.
I think that they're allowed on this side. You're
Okay.
saying, okay, so.
I'm not sure what currently the ordinance says, but
Yeah,
I think
so
they're-
they're
Seems
allowed
like
on the
we'd have
side if
to-
they, you know, meet, I think the side setback, et cetera, so,
okay.
but there is what you could do is look at reducing that square footage,
I
right?
guess if you.
From 20,000, because that's prohibitive, so.
We changed it barely. Oh, yeah, that's right.
But with a detached, you would have a natural incentive for the design of the building to put the entrance on the front anyway. I mean, that could be, you know.
I think on a detached, it would be fine to have it, this fronts be the same, on the same plane or face the
Yeah,
same way,
I
because
agree.
it's like, oh, it's another house.
I agree.
Yeah,
But I guess maybe if we're not comfortable with having them attached, then that would be my recommendation, is we just reduce the lot size requirement for a detached ADU And then we get the owner occupied element that Johnson likes and
I like it too.
Chief
I
Quinn.
think that's a
loves.
critical.
I actually would prefer something other than owner occupied. I just don't see how we can enforce anything other than owner occupied. It'd be great if we could enforce something else,
Well,
and maybe down the road we'll be able to.
Give us 1 or 2 more elections, we won't be able to enforce anything if it has to do with people's houses.
You might be right.
We
We
need
might
places
get
for
forced
people to
into
live.
this.
You can't tell them no.
But we may as well not give it away.
Yeah.
Before that.
And I think what Eric's saying is right, is where we're headed, because if you think about it, the state legislature has essentially abolished single-family zones. Every
Yeah.
single zone in the state is entitled to have multiple units,
And
with the
ADU.
exception of if you carve out under development agreement and everyone's on the same page up front. But every single zone in the state is now a duplex zone.
Because of ADUs.
Mhm.
Yep. And
But
there's
not
only gonna get
necessarily
more-
detached though, right?
Right, not necessarily detached. But the ugliest ones are the attached ones. Anyways,
For sure they are.
additions are always the worst thing anyone can do to their house if it's not done right.
Right,
So,
right.
So it sounds like though what we're talking about then is to not recommend this zone text amendment and instead ask that they bring something else back, right?
Yes.
Mhm. I agree.
The staff brings something else.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, sorry.
Some tweaking to the current ADU
Mhm.
ordinance.
Yeah, reduce the lot minimum for a detached ADU and RCC zone. We can leave it, I think it's 20,000 everywhere, right, in the city? So we could just specifically carve out the RCC to have it reduced.
You could, or you could set, it's just my recommendation would be either the same everywhere or set standards the way you did for the accessory buildings when you looked at things like HP1 versus the R1 zones versus the RE20s and have an additional line put out. So it's like the R zones, including these handful, have this square footage requirement. And R15s, maybe you don't allow them or they're permitted if they're really specific tiny homes or something, like basically tailor it to each of these different zones because at 8,000 square feet, and that's still a lot of square footage. The part that you got to think about is the square footage of the lot is relative to the size of the home. And so at times it might make total sense on a small lot to have 2 structures. And, but in other cases, if they've maximized the house on an 8,000 square foot lot, then they may not even have room to build one.
Unless they did it internally.
Yeah, but I would say if we're going to go that route, let's not limit it to RCC. Let's look at it in the R110, R12.5 HP zones and make a determination of, do we want smaller ADUs? Because all it will do is somebody will build one in RCC and you'll get an application for one in R110. And we'll have to
Address it again.
We'll address it again.
Rezone their property to RCC.
It's all right. Everything rezoned to RCC.
Now, duplexes are allowed in other zones other than RCC in our city, right?
Only R2,
Okay,
which
I thought
is
they were, I thought it was just RCC that was
Yeah.
restricted.
all of the R2, 3, 4 zones can have attached dwelling homes. Or in PRUDs, if the planned residential unit development was established as an area where they did standards for duplexes. Example there being Quail or Roy Lance Farms, which is north of Village of Prominence Point along 1900. The road sweeps back along the river. And that's one where you'll see just west of, is it Master
Big O
Muffler?
Tire.
There on yes,
Big O.
thank you, Big O Tire. You start to see 2-family dwellings in that neighborhood there. And that was a PRUD that was approved back in the early 2000s. This will still move forward to council. We took the last recommendation, which would actually had a similar result with planning commission to this of consider your ADU stuff. But we didn't have an actual ordinance, took it to council and council directed us to bring it back. So they will weigh in on 2-family dwellings in RCC, but we'll take the suggestion from planning commission and consider size of lot as it relates to separate. or
Do you need a
detached.
specific like motion for a recommendation from us for the
We need a
council?
motion for recommendation on this zoning text amendment 2022-04 for the RCC. We need a something that will move forward to the council. And it can be if, per the conversation, so I'm not gonna say this is what the motion should be, but it could be, we choose not to do this, and then planning commission recommends consideration of this other stuff, and that can be built into the, sizing for ADUs and lot sizes for ADUs. That can be built into the staff report that ultimately goes forward to council, but they will be considering the recommendation just on this one,
Specifically on
on the two family dwellings in RCC.
Well, I will make a motion that we recommend to the city council that two-family dwellings not be allowed in the RCC zone specifically, primarily due to the fact that ADUs meet the same dwelling needs, but keep the character of the neighborhood. One thing that we would like to consider in the future is that the lot size requirement for ADUs in this zone be reduced to something smaller than it currently is at, is it 20,000?
Yep. For detached ADUs.
For detached ADUs.
I'll second that.
Can I add a clause to that?
Yeah, sure.
Or after it, before?
You suggest, and then if she wants to
Friendly- it's a
amend her
friendly amendment.
motion.
Okay. I would add a friendly amendment to that, that the city council even consider for owner occupied ADUs in the RCC zone specifically, the ability to have it be more than one unit. Potentially.
So multiple AUs essentially.
Yeah, and they could be attached, I like what Brandon drew there, essentially. You don't have to accept it, but
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with that, but you can make a separate motion and they could vote on that one.
no, I just throwing it out there.
There's a motion and a
Yeah.
second on the table, so that motion will have to play out. It can
Okay,
die or it can fail. It won't die, but it could fail and then a new motion can come up, but there will need to be action on the motion that's been.
currently, okay.
And we do typically pass along all comments in the staff report to the
Absolutely.
council, which would include yours.
Great.
So
Johnson. I just want a clarifying question there. With the ADU that's more than one occupant, did we just loop back to duplexes?
We do.
No,
No,
No, because they still have the owner occupied element.
Got it. So there's owner occupied on one
it's
part.
all owned by one
duplex,
person.
Yep.
Yeah, but it could be a dual family
So
dwelling
it
as
could
long
be.
as the owner occupied was.
like you live in your house and then you build a detached duplex,
Yep.
so to speak.
Example
So there's
one.
3 families on one parcel.
Got it.
Yep.
But one of those owns all of the property.
Yep.
Okay.
I just don't see how to enforce that long term.
Right.
I don't like, you can't require, I don't see how we could sell all that whole thing to another owner if you decided you didn't want to own that house.
Yeah, it seems like it would detract. I'm not sure I'd want to build that if I was the owner, because then the chances of selling it would be very low or much harder to do.
Assuming you're gonna sell it to another owner who wants to buy that.
Right.
Yeah,
But
right.
most likely you're gonna sell it to an investor who wants all 3 as rentals.
Yeah.
And then he rents them all out, you wouldn't know until years later.
Tell it's a meth house and then all of a sudden we get complaints and they'll find out the owner lives in Alaska.
I think that's fair.
Then you gotta tear down the
You're
house.
saying-
Yeah.
all landlords eventually rent out meth houses.
And all ones that want
rental.
Should ask Eric about that.
Yeah.
and all ones that are problematic.
Yeah.
Live in Alaska somewhere.
Yeah.
And
Owners.
live in Scottsdale currently.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying
Just
that.
asking.
All
All
right.
right, is there any other discussion on this?
No.
All right, I guess we'll go with a vote on the current motion. Commissioner Barker,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas,
Yes.
Commissioner Webb,
Yes.
Commissioner Nancarrow,
Yes.
Commissioner Watson,
Yes.
And I vote yes. That motion will pass.
Good discussion though.
Great.
Okay, so what do I need to do regarding my public?
We need to do the public hearing for the setbacks. Even though we did receive public comment, we didn't actually hold the public hearing, and so we just have to do that.
Okay,
It's open.
so we're gonna open the public hearing for item number 6, which was zone text amendment 2022-03, which was the consideration and our discussion, consideration, recommendation on legislative amendment to reduce the side setbacks for garages. That's open at this time.
And there is still one attendee on Zoom. They're not raising their hand.
Just, I'd like to note that when we did have this discussion earlier, even though we didn't open a public hearing, the applicant was here and did provide comment and discussion at that time.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, go ahead, Mayor.
this is Neil Berube. I'm currently a resident of North Ogden, but maybe ran out of the city soon. So I was just wondering if the commission had considered, for instance, a little bit of substance over form. On the setback, if someone had, still had 10 feet after somebody added a garage, if there was 20 feet, 10 feet on both sides, or 8 and 12, isn't the substance the same as having 10 and 10? So could it be considered, as long as there was at least 20 feet between the two residents, that could be a qualifier and we could allow extensions like was requested? As long as that minimum 20 feet is there?
In theory, yes, but if you put that stipulation in, what you're saying then is the neighbor can never expand his house out to his 10-foot setback. He now has to live by a 12-foot setback. If you're saying that there has to be 20 feet between residences.
Yeah, minimum. I guess.
So by one neighbor extending out that setback down to 8 feet, he's then impacting his neighbor to say he can never come closer than 12 to his own property line.
Which is the case, and you would know more about this, Eric, than I, but it seems like garages are usually on the same sides of the house. I know there's probably the exception, but I was thinking maybe that's why it wouldn't be an issue. I've not seen many who try to expand their actual home out to the side, but
I would agree with you.
You could have a good point there, but I was just thinking, I'm a substance over form guy, and as long as there's the distance between the homes, I was just thinking that. So just threw that out, and just wanted to say I appreciate all you guys' service and thorough evaluation and discussion on citizens' requests. So thank you for your service. Just a thought that was in my mind.
Thanks, Mayor. Else?
Nobody else?
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So moving on then, I guess now we'll public comments again for anything that wasn't on the agenda. If there's anything further, go ahead and do that.
Someone online.
Okay. Planning commissioner remarks. Anybody have anything?
Yeah, I have one comment. So I didn't want to make this comment when we were voting on the first issue, the one that the mayor just referenced, but I wanted to wait for this. The reason that I voted no, one, I knew it was going to make a difference. I could see where it was,
Vote your feeling, not the.
But I did. And
Yeah.
the reason for that was, from my first question, could we have more R110? I actually think it would be great in North Ogden City to have more R110. Like, I don't think everything should be R18 in our city. And by considering reducing the setbacks, I think it could do a couple of things. One, it could allow people to be creative with R110. And two, it would give people a backyard. I think backyards are going to be more important going forward than side yards are. We're going to have density, and someone can either pick an R18, it's a tiny little lot, or we can consider these
side yards that have less function as, considering in the future, especially with some R110 or something like that, hey, why don't we allow these houses to be a little bit closer, just so people have a place to live in their backyard if they want to pay more? Because I think developers could charge more. Maybe they can't today, but I think in the future, as backyards become more desirable because they're so small, they'll either buy an older house. Some people just want to build a new house. And if they had some backyard there, it might be helpful.
So what I heard in your comment is you like the R110, so let's allow those adjustments. But what I heard was if you're adjusting a side setback, that's allowing a bigger house on the size of lot it is, which would be accomplished and create backyard. Well, in the R18 then saying, well, if we allow them to go closer to the property line, those people can get a bigger backyard in the R18 because now we allow them closer. So
Maybe.
what I
that's
heard
a
you
very good
explaining
point.
was
Yeah.
almost more justification for an R18 lot to say, well, go make the houses wider instead of deeper so they can have a bigger backyard.
Yeah, no, I see where you're going with that. Yeah.
I mean,
I didn't think about it that way.
but yes, the way the city stands, and in my opinion, I don't see a lot of change. Everything up on the hill is pretty much outlined the size that it is, whether it's 2-acre lot, 12.5 zone or 10,000 foot zone. They tend to be bigger lots. Everything that's undeveloped that you could say could be up on the hill. I don't think the zones are pretty laid out and I don't think they're going to change.
Totally.
From the city building south, that vacant ground, I think could be a number of different zones that somebody buys it, says, hey, I want to do R18 or R112. A lot of that could change, but I see because of affordability that everything like it has been keeps pushing to smaller lots to try and fit people to get somebody in a single family out of a townhome into a single family home.
Totally.
And the only way they can accomplish that is by fitting more of those single family homes on an acre of ground so that it can be affordable.
Yeah.
But so that then is the importance of saying, okay, if we want the open space, then maybe we need to keep the setbacks bigger so that we don't feel like everybody's jamming into one spot.
Good point. It's a really good point.
Right.
Yeah.
So instead, we just leave things be and the next commission can deal with it. I apologize for jumping up and out. If you guys, as I was in the car on the way down here, my son's mission president called me and he was in the hospital and knocked his tooth through his lip and they were going surgery. He's okay. He's going to a different hospital to get his lips
I'm
on.
glad my kids are too old for that now.
So, yeah.
Glad he's okay.
Actually never outgrow that. I'm sorry.
No harm, no foul. They're just mission president's trying to figure out how to get it fixed down there because the church wants him to come home and get it fixed. He's only got 3 months left on his mission and he's worried that they'll just release him. And my son doesn't want that and the president we don't want that. So we're like, just get it fixed down there, hopefully. Yeah.
You don't want him home?
Yeah, we don't, yeah.
This is recorded.
Yeah,
you're on the record.
we want him to be able to finish his mission.
You're supportive of what the mission president wants and your son wants.
Yeah, he's in Anaheim, so that's it's only an hour away flight, so that's why they're like, oh.
But they don't have to do medical stuff.
But just, the church just says, well, they like it, their parents to make those decisions, so they send them home and we'll see. So anyway.
Okay. Anything else from us? Okay. Scott, you have anything?
No, I don't have any comments tonight.
John, do you have anything?
No.
Okay.
Can I make a motion, we adjourn?
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Don't worry, man, the gift card is a good old.
Well, my son, he's like, yeah, whatever, he doesn't care. We're like, no, you need to keep your lips on. It's gonna be this big old
Yeah, you gotta get it.
chunk out in the restaurant.
Tell the president. say, yeah,
It'll, did you just finish meeting, bro?
We've had
So
this
hit end.
discussion.
Yeah.
But